Good morning. So blessed and beautiful to be able to start my morning out with you all. So I want to start by talking about my come from place. My come from place is not tech. It's not Google. My come from place is over 15 years working as a human rights lawyer on the issue of gender-based violence. My come from place is doing the work with women behind bars, visiting women's prisons and women's jails all over the country, and being pulled aside by women who told me stories of how they had been shackled during labor, during childbirth. One woman in Tennessee pulled me aside and said that when she was pregnant, when she was 7 months pregnant, she was transported from Florida to Tennessee, and the entire time had a belly shackle around her 7th month pregnant belly. I was pulled aside by another woman during this time in a prison in Philadelphia who said to me, "You could have shackled every part of my body. They only shackled my wrists, but they could have shackled every part of me if I could keep my baby after he was born." That's my come from place. I come also from the work of fighting against child trafficking, of fighting with and on behalf of girls, disproportionately Black and brown girls under the age of 18, who were bought and sold here in this country. But instead of being seen as victims of child rape, we put these girls behind bars for child prostitution. I worked with a girl who told me she had been sold to so many men every single night that she didn't know what the point was of putting on her clothes. And that girl I didn't meet in a program for survivors of sexual violence or trafficking. I met her in a girls' detention center. That's my come from place. I worked every day to fight against gender-based violence because I refuse to give my children a world where to be female is to be hurt. So why am I at Google? Because I didn't become a human rights lawyer, with all due respect, to work for Google. But I joined 2 years ago for a couple of reasons. And one is because I believe that human rights lawyers need to be in the private sector, and especially in tech. Yes. We are at a moment, especially now, where the private sector and very much the tech sector has as much influence and power over human rights standards and practices as civil society and government. And the other thing is that if you look at most of our justice-based movements, they're digital movements, right? Me Too is the most recent, most powerful example of how the justice movements happening are online. But there's another reason that has to do with how you get trained as a human rights lawyer, which is that The training is all about documentation. You document the mothers who have been shackled during pregnancy and labor and childbirth behind bars so that you expose it to the world so that the world bears witness. You document so that the world knows, so that the world bears witness. One of our greatest human rights defenders was Mamie Till. Her son, Emmett Till, in 1955, was pulled from his bed, tortured, and lynched. And she insisted that her boy, her child, have an open coffin so that the world would bear witness to the terror of white supremacy, so that the world would bear witness to racial terror. Because Mamie Till knew, as so many of us who are human rights lawyers, who are human rights activists, we understand that abuse is maintained and protected in the context of isolation and silence. Almost every act of abuse happens in isolation and silence. And so here's the thing about tech. What tech allows for is to be able to interrogate, interrupt, tear down the walls of isolation and silence that protect the abuse. Think about our phones and how our phones, those mobile devices, captured police brutality. And those images that we captured on our phones were shared on the global platforms of Facebook, of YouTube, and it has changed the conversation of how we acknowledge and grapple with police brutality. These phones have become powerful human rights tools. So I constantly spend my day at Google thinking about how do we take these existing and new technologies and think about how to center them around human rights issues. And I want to talk about some of what we've been able to do in the context of criminal justice reform. How have we been able to think through the use of technology to be able to bear witness to the human costs of mass incarceration? So one of the things that I'm proud of at Google is that first we've talked about this from a policy and law perspective, right? What is Google's responsibility from policy and law to the issue of justice reform? So one thing that we did just a couple months ago was take down all of the ads for the bail bond industry on search. We also banned the box and now require that our suppliers, as part of their code of conduct, also ban the box. But here's the other thing. You know, VR is great for gaming, and I had this VR experience of like swimming with the whales, which was incredible. But there's a whole way that we can use VR to bear witness, to be proximate and in first person. So we've used VR to, for just 3 minutes, give full immersion of solitary. Did a 6:9 video, VR, where you are fully immersed in the audio and visual experience of what solitary is. And that content is narrated by individuals who have been in solitary. We're thinking about how can we use VR to give the experience of being a child behind bars. You talk to young folk who have been put in adult prisons, and they talk about how the shackles had to be wrapped around their wrists several times because their wrists were too small for the size of those shackles. How do you show that in VR in first person so that even if just briefly, there's a way to scale the prison walls and create connectedness, create the experience of proximity? The other way that we're thinking about how do we use technology to scale the prison walls is to do digital storytelling and to center it. So we did a short doc on the jail that's right around the corner from here, on Rikers. And as part of that experience of telling the stories of families who talk about having a loved one at Rikers and what they had to go through just to be able to visit their loved one, or the experience of adult men talking about when they were taken to Rikers as 16-year-old boys. We did that through YouTube and YouTube creators, because the question that we keep asking is, how do we use these different platforms that we have to be able to disrupt mass incarceration? So we use VR, we use YouTube platform, and then we also, this past year, had the experience of working with children, with mothers behind bars. And they did digital love letters to their mothers. And those digital love letters we put on the homepage of Google for Mother's Day. And so it was the experience on the homepage, right, of those who visit the site, the thousands, hundreds of thousands of individuals who go to Google's homepage, who have the opportunity to bear witness to the voices of children whom we rarely hear from, and especially on Mother's Day, which for them is such a painful experience, but for this past Mother's Day was an opportunity for them to give voice to their love and connection to their mothers. These are the different ways that I think we can talk about and rethink how technology can be used to approach and acknowledge the condition and rights abuses of others. I also think that, we gotta be very real, right? There are so many ways that technology is also being used to take away our rights, right? To threaten our rights. And we see every day how oppressive regimes are using social media to surveil and control their citizens, and especially the human rights defenders in those countries. But here's the thing. I deeply believe that we have this opportunity to be able to reframe, reimagine, rethink, and re-engineer technology to advance our human rights. That we are the ones who can insist that when we create these products, when we create these platforms, that we can do it from a rights-based framework, that we must do it from a rights-based framework. Because if we do that, then we can bend the moral arc of the tech universe towards justice.